People who watch security cameras for a living. What creepy things have you tried to forget? Story 1. Worked as a harbor master a while ago. Had to check the marina's cameras after a boat was abandoned at our docks. I was looking for the owner. I looked on the tape from the boat's first night in the marina. The man who had sailed the boat in was standing on the end of his boat for 2 hours, barely moving. Then, at 1:30 a.m., he just walked off the back and dropped into the water. He never came back up. Never found his body. Freaky. We now have a Discord. Check out the server in the link in the description. Story 2. I used to do IT support for a charity that supplied housing and support for homeless people. A large proportion also had mental health issues, so there was a fair amount of interesting events that happened. Being in IT, I avoided experiencing most of it firsthand, though I was threatened with being stabbed on about my 3rd day. Anyway, I come in one Monday, and there's an email labeled urgent. It says that there was an incident in the stairwell of one of our properties on Sunday night, and could I pull the relevant CCTV footage and put it on DVD? I had to do this quite frequently. I skip through the footage, find the incident, usually a fight or blatant drug dealing, and burn it to DVD for the police. The email never mentioned what the incident was, so I skip through the footage and watch as a clearly very agitated man ties a rope around a stair rail at the top of the stairs, then his neck. He looks over the rail and then just casually tips forward over it. The rope flipped him round and he dangled there, twitching for far too long before he just stopped. So yeah, that was a fun Monday. Story 3. Wasn't a security officer, but I worked at a 24/7 gas station for a while. One night, my coworker accidentally unalived himself while at work, and I made the mistake of watching the footage. He went to the back of the store with a bag of drugs, probably coke, snorted it, and started acting funny for about 10 minutes. He then sits in the back office and gets fidgety/thrashing around until he finally just goes limp in the chair. He had died of a heart attack and sat there for 5 hours before anyone came in, thought the absence of an employee was strange, and called the cops. It was really weird seeing people come in and act all upset for the lack of service. They'd just leave thinking someone was lazy, but nah, dude was dead. Story 4. Was watching CCTV footage of a parking deck, and on the 9th level there's this guy sitting in the middle of the deck, banging his head into one of the pillars. All of a sudden the guy just stops and runs over the edge. Without stopping or jumping, he flings himself over. I immediately called dispatch and told them what had happened. A few days later, I was offered counseling for those events. Story 5. I work in a retail store, and for a while I worked security here. Watching the security cameras wasn't technically my job, but we were consistently short-handed in that department, and the manager was grooming me for promotion, so I got to fill in and watch the cameras occasionally. One day, when we were reviewing footage from overnights, we saw this teenager calmly set down his shopping basket, take off his hat and glasses, and just charge at a wall, hit it head on. He did this 2 more times. When he was done, his face was a bloody mess, and he just put his hat and glasses back on and left. Weirded me right the hell out. This sounds like one absurdly troubled teen. I hope they managed to find some help, or, admittedly at the very least, not graduated onto hurting other people rather than themselves. Story 6. Was a security coordinator for a large electrical company and had access to like 80+ facilities CCTV infrastructures. Was doing maintenance check on some random train station at like 3 a.m. Panned a camera as far to the right as possible to check that it was functioning. And this dude was on all fours eating a deer in the middle of the tracks. Watched him for like 10 minutes and went to get the other guy on shift. When I came back, the dude was gone. Rewound it, and the dude stopped munching on the carcass, wiped the gore off his face, and walked into the woods like he didn't have a care in the world. Edit. Read all the comments, and the most asked questions and their answers are here. Where did this happen? Iowa. Why did you just stand there like an idiot? Was late at night in the middle of a long shift. Also didn't really process what the hell was happening. Kinda forgot I had someone else in the office that could come over and see what was going on. What was he wearing? Was kinda hard to tell, as the CCTV was basically filming at the end of its effective view. Looked like he was wearing some kind of heavy outerwear, like something you would work outside in the winter with. It was late fall, so nights would dip into the 30s. Story 7. I used to work loss prevention for a big box store. We had a lady get arrested for public indecency, and I was asked to investigate. I had to follow her backwards from the point of arrest, and it was a trip to say the least. She arrived at the store swerving and nearly hitting several cars. She entered the store with 2 young children, both of whom are mentally handicapped. That lady literally dragged those kids around the store, slapping them and tugging at their ears/collars if they didn't obey. At some point, she just abandons them in the clothing section, walks through the back doors to the break area, and I'm assuming she thought it was the bathroom because she proceeds to pull down her pants and craps all over the fire exit door. She pulls her pants up, without wiping, mind you, and goes back to the floor like nothing happened. Someone saw what she did and followed her. Luckily, there's an officer in the store at the time and quickly approaches her when the associate tells him what she did. Needless to say, she was definitely high and or drunk and was arrested. The scary part is, she did not mention those kids one time. It wasn't until I reviewed the tape that I saw that they were still waiting by the shopping cart, completely oblivious and afraid to move. Child Services was later called, and I still think about those kids often. Breaks my heart to think about the BS those kids must still be going through. Story 8. I used to do asset production for a Walmart in a very heroin-addicted area. The creepiest thing was seeing how fast someone would go from completely normal to completely out of it in the span of a year because of the drug. You could build a timeline of their demise through CCTV pictures and video. One man in particular really stood out to me. The first time I apprehended him, he was very polite and intelligent, just stealing to get his fix. A year later, and the fourth time I caught him, he was basically a shell of a man. He tried running from me, and I looked him right in the eyes and said, "Look, I know you, Gary last name. Please don't run." The look on his face of someone knowing him who he couldn't even remember will always stay with me. Story 9. I used to do IT support for a company that had a lot of heavy machinery moving around inside a big warehouse type area. This giant front-end loader would scoop up material and dump it into a hopper. Along the sides of the floor were these huge concrete barriers. I've heard them called Jersey barriers and mafia blocks, but they are about 10 feet tall. And this one guy's life was ended when the front-end loader inadvertently scooped the base of the barrier and landed on one of the two guys walking shoulder to shoulder through the plant. I was tasked to review the footage, then make copies, 6 of them to be exact, and then ensure that the footage worked and was self-executable and able to be run from a USB stick. So I had to watch the footage of this guy getting unalived over a dozen times. I was offered counseling for just watching the video. Story 10. I was working at a pub in Sydney and watching this CCTV when I saw a guy continually cross and uncross his legs while playing a poker/slot machine. After a few minutes, he walked to a corner of the room, took a crap, and proceeded to go back to playing his machine. Talk about being addicted. That man needs some serious help. Like, I'll bet there are people who have gambled their whole lives away and still not done that. That is addiction supreme. Story 11. Not a job, but my SO and I have the outlet monitor for our infant looking at his crib and room. It's set up like CCTV, and it's creepy to begin with. I wake up at 2 a.m. and I go check on him, and I go back to bed. Once in bed, I get on my phone to view the monitor just for reassurance. And I see 2 light dots, like eyes, in the night vision in the window of his room. I first crap my pants, and I go into the room to check everything out. I can't see anything outside, so I turn on the monitor again and don't see the dots anymore. So I think it could have been a dog or something. I go back to bed and wake up again an hour later to check the monitor, and the dots are freaking there again. So I grab a pistol and go outside around his room and check the spot by the window, really ready to have to pull the trigger. Adrenaline is on full blast. I don't find or see anything, but the monkey grass has been mashed down by that window like something sat there for a while. I set up a sleeping bag in my son's room after that for a couple of nights, and I checked the monitor so I could see what the night vision caught, but I never saw those lights again. I'm super thankful it was just that, but I was scared. Edit. I am usually skeptical about stuff like this. I considered lights and stuff, and I hope it was an animal and not a person. But my son is now 6 months. This happened when he was 4 months. And the camera has been there since we brought him home. The whole time it's been up, I've never seen that, and I don't live by traffic lights and no street lamp is on that side of the house. I seriously almost lost bladder control when I saw them again, same spot just an hour later. But when I went into his room and looked at my phone, I just saw me and him and a black window. It freaked me out so much I prepared to defend my family, but he's 6 months now and I've never seen it again, so hopefully an animal. Story 12. Not for a living, but we had security cameras installed on the property whilst we were living in South Africa. We had a monitor set up next to the bed so we could see what was happening on the 4 cameras without having to get up out of bed. One night, we heard something unusual, so we turn on the monitor and see nothing. I'm ready to go back to sleep, but my partner thinks something is off about one of the cameras. "Does this camera look like it's pointing in a different direction slightly?" she asks. "No, same as always." and it's back to bed for me. She isn't convinced, so she starts watching the recordings. Sure enough, footage of some dude prowling around on the property, and the camera catches him adjusting it. The terrifying bit? The way his face looked beneath the balaclava. Murder mask is what my SO called it. Pretty creepy stuff. Story 13. I reviewed the security cameras around my office building. The cameras only monitor outside of the building. We have signs posted everywhere stating that cameras are watching. You get accustomed to certain movement patterns and activations of cameras. So I don't have to review the whole day's activity, just the parts that show things out of the ordinary. For a while, homeless people were using an area behind landscaping to kick back and smoke drugs. It's all in full view of one of the cameras. Watched a few drug sales there too. However, the most disturbing by far was the banging. Basically, guys would take the homeless women to that area and do any number of weird and wonderful things. The weirdest of all was when some dude lay on the ground, and a drug-slinging / homeless woman sat on a bench looking at her phone. He slipped off her flip-flop and started sucking off her toes. He took short breaks intermittently to hit a glass drug pipe, then went back to work on the toes. This went on for about 45 minutes and then they left. We systematically found almost all the homeless escorts during the day and told them our place has cameras and to not come back. Things have been quiet for a few years now. I don't know why OP's gotta hate. That man is living his best life. For legal reasons, that's a joke. Story 14. So many of these will give me nightmares, so I'll throw one in the mix that I never want to forget. A year back, I was working at a hostel, and we have security cameras throughout the building. Watching the footage from the camera in the kitchen, it is about 2 a.m. and a very drunk guest walks in, grabs some snacks, and accidentally drops an empty bottle onto the ground. He then proceeds to kick it up into the air and then kick it again in the air, where it flies across the entire length of the room perfectly into the recycling bin. In his drunken state, he threw up his hands, ran around in a circle, clearly in shock at how amazing he is. Then, after looking around, he noticed there was no one around to see it. After that, he looked visibly depressed and stumbled back out of the kitchen. Story 15. Working in a rehearsal studio for bands, we had a camera at the front desk that pointed down the hall with the entrances to all the rooms. One day, I'm sitting there minding my own business and noticed there was a girl sitting in the hallway outside of one of the studios. She had come in with the band that was practicing, and I just assumed she didn't feel like sitting in the loud space with the band. So I got up and went to tell her that she was welcome to sit in the lobby where there was a couch and TV. I got around the corner and she wasn't there. I went back to the desk and there she was, sitting in the hall waiting outside the room. So I went back out to find her. Not there again. I assumed she had gone into the room, so I went and knocked and they informed me that the girl had left a while before, just after they had gotten started practicing. So I went back and there she was, still on the cameras. It was only then that I realized I had accidentally bumped the freeze frame button for the monitor. Story 16. I had a job reviewing hidden tape footage looking for people sabotaging food product in a factory. The entire idea was creepy on one level. They made pasta and they were finding things like glass, screw staples and crap in the product. Thankfully, none of it made it out of the plant. They had metal detectors at the end of the line, because it's common for things like metal shavings to get in the product given the machines. So they want to catch that and stop the product. But machines went off and they'd inspect the product to find ridiculous crap in there, where there's no way it could have made it in unless someone put it there. That's creepy because think about how possibly terrible it would have been if that product ever made it to the public. You aren't paying attention, you throw your shells in the pot, boil them along with a nail, then feed that crap to your kids who just chomp down? Thank God for the fail-safes. Anyway, they need to catch whoever is doing it. They install the cameras in the areas where most of the affected product is made and packaged. They record it all. Then they hire me to go through the tapes on high speed, looking for alarms going off on the machines or anything weird. So I see a ton of stuff that's notable. Some of it funny, some of it cruel, some of it just plain terrible. Eventually, I do figure out who the saboteur was. But the creepiest thing was this guy was driving a forklift around with his kid, not only on the forklift with him, but hanging out of the sides of it, waving at people. It's creepy because at some point, not long after that, the guy unalived his kid somehow in a forklift accident. Thankfully, the accident wasn't on tape, or at least my tapes. Kid never should have been allowed into the plant. Certainly not on the frickin' forklift. And this guy unalived his kid. So it was like I was watching a ghost. And I kept wishing I'd had those tapes to review a week or whatever earlier, because as soon as I would have said something, they would have disciplined the dude and maybe saved the kid. OSHA would have a field day with that. What are you doing, dude? Like, okay, obviously it's unsafe because something terrible happened, but that should be obvious, right? You are operating heavy machinery and having your kid just hang out in the plant. It's weird. It's weird. There's a reason why bring your kid to work day isn't every day. Story 17. I'm not in security, but I work for a bank, and part of my job is checking the cameras in the mornings for pings overnight, and then making sure all the pings were just squirrels or leaves, etc. Last week, I saw a ping on our back entrance camera, and when I went to watch the video, it was a guy I didn't recognize walking back and forth in front of the door at 3 a.m. for a solid 20 minutes. Like, just pacing the whole time. And every couple minutes he'd stop and walk up to the door and stare into the camera. Then he'd go back to pacing. A car eventually went by, and that must have set something off in him because he legit ran away and didn't come back. We ended up calling the cops about it, but I still have no idea who he was or what his deal was. Story 18. Watched a female employee in the span of maybe a minute pick her nose, itch her front junk like a champ, then reverse things up and go the whole hand down her crack, scratching. Large lady. Then she pulled up her hand to her face and sniffed. And then, inexplicably, she licked the pointer finger. I've seen all manner of weird crap, but that one sticks with me. Seen people pee, crap, or whatever in the open, or in fitting rooms. Or people getting it on in the fitting rooms, of course. Watched several dudes punching the purple clown. Always weird to confront them. Had to apprehend one for spunking on a rack of FUBU. One of the perps are usually following young girls around, snapping photos, thinking no one sees them. And yes, I mean underage. Sometimes horribly underage girls. Coworker of mine had to have a guy arrested who was jerking it in the children's section while children were nearby. I was happy I wasn't there for that. I'm not violent, and I'm about 100% certain I wouldn't have done anything more than call the police like she did. It's more the frustration that you want to slap the crap out of someone, and you know you can't do it. People will do crazy crap when they don't think they're being watched. Story 19. Not necessarily creepy, but I work on security for a popular UK supermarket, and came into work one day to find a note asking me to burn an incident off the cameras onto disk. It was something from the car park the previous night, so I figured we'd had a shoplifter or an accident in the car park. But no, it wasn't anything as pleasant as that. We'd had a situation where a couple, older white gentleman and a young-ish Asian female, had been in store, and the night security guy just thought they were acting a bit funny. So he follows them around the store on CCTV in store to see if anything went on. Nothing really happens during this time, though the guy seems to become more and more aggravated. They go outside having purchased their shopping to pack it in the car boot, when a clear argument occurs between them. He suddenly turns round, kicks the empty trolley across the car park, and then smacks her full force in the face out of seemingly nowhere. She recoils in pain, a bit more shouting takes place, but she seems to dutifully take her seat in the passenger seat despite what just took place. During the process of burning this to disk for the police, since our security guy had called it in as an assault, I had to rewatch the moment where he hit her over and over again, but watch helplessly as she seems to calmly get into the car of the man who just assaulted her. Long story short, she was a mail-order bride who was trafficked here, and as well as assault, he got done in for people trafficking. So a pretty wholesome ending to an otherwise awful story. I feel like people who do those sorts of things get caught so infrequently, so huge props to OP. Human trafficking of any kind is disgusting, and I'm glad at least a little bit of it was dealt with.